Most people say men over 60 get used because they're lonely. That's wrong. Men get used because they keep giving in and call it kindness. You didn't reach this age to be adjusted around. You reached it to be settled. Nothing dramatic happens. No arguments, no explosions, just small concessions, a boundary softened, a standard delayed, and each one feels harmless until it isn't. This isn't about blaming women, and it isn't about acting tough. It's about recognizing the exact moment a man starts giving more than his life can afford. Some men reach this stage and become calmer, steadier, harder to shake. Others slowly feel tired, uncertain, and stretched thin, without knowing why. We're not here to change her. We're here to stop that slide. After 60, strength doesn't come from effort. It comes from restraint. And once a man stops giving in, his life begins to hold its shape again. Sacrificing your identity. It doesn't start with sacrifice. It starts with concession. You wake up early every morning and walk the same route you followed for years. She enters your life, and one day you leave a little earlier, another day you skip the walk altogether. Not because you had to, but because it felt easier. You cancel a regular game. You reschedule a habit. You tell yourself it's temporary. Nothing feels urgent yet. But weeks later, something has shifted. Your days no longer feel like they belong to you. When a man starts rearranging his life to keep someone comfortable, he teaches something without saying a word. His routines stop carrying weight. When a man loses his own rhythm, it's not flexibility. It's instability, like a train leaving its tracks. It doesn't become freer, it just becomes easier to derail. A man with direction doesn't rush to adjust. He moves inside the structure he built long before anyone arrived. That structure is what makes him hard to move. At this stage of life, attraction doesn't grow from effort. It grows from order. The moment you start editing who you are to maintain harmony, you stop being experienced and start becoming convenient. And the moment you become convenient, you stop being chosen. If this feels familiar, a simple like lets me know this kind of clarity still matters here on Move or Die Stoic. Over-investing too early. After a man starts adjusting his life, the next step feels almost reasonable. And this is where many men quietly lose leverage. He gives more time, more attention, more reassurance, not out of desperation, but without stopping to ask if it was earned. He answers messages faster, clears his schedule sooner, plans ahead before anything has been earned. Closeness doesn't need to be rushed at this stage of life. If something is real, it doesn't disappear when you slow down. But many men mistake speed for sincerity. They believe giving early proves value. They believe availability builds connection. What it actually does is remove space. When you invest before reality has had time to show itself, you aren't leading anything forward. You're trying to secure it. And security offered too early doesn't feel grounding. It feels assumed. You give emotional access before she's shown consistency. Your effort becomes expected. After 60, your time is no longer renewable. Neither is your energy. Giving slowly isn't withholding. It's staying aligned with what's real. When your investment matches reality, things stay steady. When it doesn't, the connection starts leaning on you before it ever learns how to stand on its own. And once the balance shifts, effort won't bring it back. Putting up with too much. Disrespect rarely shows up loudly. It arrives quietly, disguised as familiarity. A joke that lands a little off. A comment said in front of others. A tone that feels casual but cuts deeper than it should. You notice it. You just don't stop it. Not because you didn't hear it, because correcting it feels inconvenient. You tell yourself it isn't worth attention. You tell yourself it's minor. What you're actually doing is teaching. Every time a line is crossed and nothing happens, the line moves. George laughed along when she joked about him in front of others. Not because it was funny, because stopping it felt awkward. Weeks later, he noticed she never lowered her tone again. That was the moment he realized silence hadn't kept the peace. It had trained her. You stop laughing it off. You stop swallowing things just to keep the moment comfortable. Especially after intimacy, you find yourself excusing things you never would have before. You just stop going along with what feels wrong. Nothing gets said, but something inside you steps back into place. And that's when the dynamic shifts. Not because you demanded anything, but because you stopped caring what was never yours. Men who stop losing ground later in life almost always recognize this moment, the moment they stopped absorbing what quietly wore them down. Becoming her financial plan. It never starts with a big request. Dinner once in a while, groceries when it's convenient. Covering a short trip because it feels easier than talking about it. You don't think much of it. You've worked your whole life. You can afford it. And for a moment, things feel smoother. The bill gets paid. The tension drops. The evening stays calm. That's how it sneaks in. Over time, something shifts. Disagreements don't get discussed anymore. They get delayed. You suggest something. It gets ignored. You pay for something else. And suddenly the mood improves. You start noticing a pattern you can't unsee. Your money isn't supporting the relationship. It's stabilizing it. Not because she planned it, because that's what happens when one person always absorbs the cost. You stop being heard. You start being used as a buffer. Later, you're sitting alone in your own place. No receipt on the table. No silence to manage. No mood to smooth over. And you feel it clearly. This is what peace feels like when it doesn't need to be purchased. Money was supposed to make your life lighter, not heavier. The moment money becomes the glue, your voice starts carrying less weight. And once that happens, you'll notice something else. You're no longer choosing, you're maintaining. Is it chivalry or is it a subscription fee for her attention? Tell me in the comments if you've ever paid to keep the peace, and share it with someone who might need the reminder. Apologizing for your standards. It doesn't start with lowering them, it starts with explaining them. You say things like, "I don't mean to be difficult. It's not a big deal. I'm probably overthinking this." Not because you doubt yourself, because you don't want to create friction. So you soften the way you say what matters. You add disclaimers. You apologize before anyone asks. Little by little, your standards stop sounding like standards. They start sounding like preferences. Keeping your standards matters as much as keeping your masculine presence. That's what keeps attraction alive, in public and behind closed doors. You weren't asking for much. You were asking for consistency, for effort that matches words, for basic regard. But when you apologize for those things, something shifts. They don't get discussed anymore. They get negotiated. There was a time you never had to explain yourself this way. Your life spoke for you. That silence is what caught her eye. And here's what quietly happens next. The more you justify yourself, the more people push back, not out of malice, out of habit. Now you simply stop adjusting when something doesn't align. And when you stop apologizing for how you live, the people who belong don't ask you to soften it, they meet it. Chasing after she pulls away. It doesn't usually start with a fight, it starts with a pause. The energy changes and you feel it even if you don't name it yet. So you lean in, you text a little more, you try to smooth what you didn't break, not because you're desperate, because you want things to go back to how they were, but chasing doesn't bring closeness back. It replaces it. The more you move towards someone who's stepping back, the more space you give away. Leo woke up around 2, checked his phone, saw nothing. By morning, he felt off balance. 3 days ago, everything felt close and warm in this very house. Now something has clearly shifted, and no one explains why. That's the cost people miss. You've loved before, more than once, and still you end up caught in the same problems again. When you chase what's pulling away, your attention starts to feel expected, and you begin adjusting your mood around someone else's availability. And slowly your center moves. You don't need to close the gap. You stay where you are. When someone pulls away and you don't follow, something becomes clear very quickly. Either they come back on their own, or they don't. Both answers save you time. The moment they noticed the silence and chose not to run toward it, nothing needs to be solved right now. He just stayed where he was. Letting her control your emotions. It doesn't start with shouting, it starts with a shift, a longer silence, a look that lingers a second too long. Nothing is said, but the room changes. She was distant last night, and before the morning begins, your body already knows the tone of the day. You're standing there, waiting for a nod. That's the posture of a child, not a grown man. That's how control enters, not because she takes it, but because he adjusts. That's the moment he loses his footing. When a man calibrates his inner state to someone else's expression, he gives away authority by choice. This isn't kindness, it's compliance. And compliance doesn't bring peace. It teaches people what they're allowed to take. So he stops reading faces, stops decoding silence. Not because he doesn't care, but because care doesn't require self-erasure. If something is real, it doesn't need you to stand at attention. He stays where he is. Nothing needs to be solved right now. Staying grounded doesn't mean pulling away. It means staying connected without abandoning yourself. And the balance shifts, not because she changed, but because he stopped asking her to. A man who reacts to every mood swing is a man without a rudder. Do you agree that silence is a man's strongest boundary? Fixing her problems at the cost of yourself. It starts small, a rough day, money trouble, family tension she doesn't want to face alone. At first you help because it feels useful. Being needed can feel dangerously close to being wanted. Then something shifts. Your days start costing more than they should. Chris realized it one afternoon, driving across town again. Another problem to solve. He couldn't remember the last time anyone asked how he was doing. He wasn't being chosen. He was being leaned on. You become the place where consequences don't land, the buffer, the cushion. And when consequences stop landing, things slowly slide out of order. Not out of cruelty, out of habit. One day you don't show up right away, and nothing collapses without you. That's when it hits. Helping crossed a line, and you were the one standing on the wrong side of it. So he stopped stepping in where responsibility was never his. When you let go, the truth doesn't explode. It reveals itself. When you stop carrying the weight, the truth shows itself. Either she steps forward or she looks elsewhere. Either way, your life stops being reduced to a role. For the first time in a long while, the feeling of ease returned. Letting her isolate you from your world. You ignore evenings with friends. Group messages pile up. Weekends fill with one plan. Your own routines fade without making noise. Michael used to meet the same friends every Friday. He skipped once, then twice. Then the invitations stopped coming. Months later, no one knew his schedule anymore. He didn't feel controlled. He felt accommodated. The moment it clicked was small. He mentioned meeting an old friend. The reaction wasn't anger, it was irritation, as if he'd stepped out of line. That's when he saw it. His world hadn't been taken from him. He quietly traded other relationships for closeness, never realizing he could have kept both. Isolation works because it feels polite. By the time you notice, there's no mirror left. One afternoon, he met that old friend for coffee. Nothing dramatic, just talk. He didn't check the time. He didn't check his phone. Walking home, one thing was clear. His life felt steadier with more than one place to stand. No permission asked. He just starts showing up again. That wasn't distance. That was order returning. Giving love before respect. Many men make one final mistake. They lead with love, hoping respect will catch up. After 60, that order no longer works. A woman can enjoy your company, but without being valued, none of that lasts. When you give love without holding your place, you agree just to keep things smooth. Later, you wonder why smooth feels so heavy. It teaches people how much of you they can take without consequence. And no amount of affection ever fills that gap. It comes from staying in your position, from knowing where you stand and staying there. Once it's missing, nothing you offer will ever be enough. Love is the reward of a relationship, but respect is the atmosphere that allows it to survive. After 60, your peace is non-negotiable. The man who chooses. At this stage of life, strength doesn't come from effort. It comes from knowing what to walk past. A man after 60 has nothing left to prove. He doesn't compete for attention. He doesn't audition for a role in someone else's life. His authority comes from a single, quiet realization. He knows exactly what he is willing to give, and he knows exactly what is not for sale. This is where most men misunderstand power. They think authority is about controlling others. It isn't. Authority is about knowing where you stand. I value you, but I won't lose myself to keep you. That isn't arrogance. That is balance. A man with options doesn't rush. He doesn't over-explain. He simply decides. Not because he's afraid of being alone, but because the life he has already built is too solid to be disrupted. After 60, you don't need to harden your heart. You simply stay in your place. You let the world reveal itself to you. You let people reveal whether they have earned a seat at your table. This is the authority of a man who has already paid for his lessons in full. And once you stop trying to be chosen, you finally stand in your own position. If this way of thinking speaks to you, subscribing means you won't have to search for it again. At 60, being alone is a choice. Being used is a mistake. Which one are you choosing today? Why this approach works. Most men think stability comes from staying alert, from adjusting, from responding quickly to every shift in mood, from making sure nothing goes wrong. But that's exactly what creates the instability. People don't relax around someone who is always watching for signals. They relax around someone who doesn't keep adjusting. A man who knows where he stands doesn't need to be cold. He just needs to stop shifting. When you stop reacting to every change, something subtle happens. The testing slows down, the questions stop, the pressure eases. This isn't because you demanded anything, it's because there's nothing left to push against. When you stop reacting, there's nothing left to push. Things either settle or they reveal themselves. That's why things stop needing effort. Not because you're controlling the relationship, but because you've removed the need to manage it. Real authority isn't something you perform. It's how you live when nothing is being tested. And once you reach that place, the world around you stops wobbling. These 10 points were never meant to harden you. They were meant to steady you. The goal isn't distance, and it isn't isolation. The goal is order. So that when someone enters your life, they enter a life that already has its rhythm. A man who isn't trying to be filled. After a lifetime of building, providing, and carrying responsibility, you're allowed to stop proving yourself. You're allowed to protect your time. You protect the quiet of the room, because that space is your territory. A relationship after 60 should add to that peace. When the right woman appears, she won't need you to shrink, chase, or rescue. She'll meet you where you already stand. And if she doesn't, you won't feel the need to convince her, because the strongest position at this stage of life isn't being wanted. It's being settled, standing in your place, clear, steady, at peace, and finally, free.